Hi everyone, my name is Brittany Avalon, and for this lit study, I did this book, The Marvelers by Danielle Clayton. And honestly, I did not start out reading this book. I started out reading the other book, and then I kind of just didn't really want to read about, a perspective of, I guess, an animal. So I switched back to this book, which I also really avoided when I was choosing the first time. And I think I avoided it, honestly, because of this, what I thought of as kind of cheesy YA cover. Um, I don't know. I guess that's why they say don't judge a book by its cover, because as soon as I actually started reading it, um, I loved it. I was sold, almost. That is, because when I first started, I was sitting in my living room with my daughter studying, and I kind of rolled my eyes and I'm like, oh, listen to this description. It's, magic people who get into a magic school and they have to defeat other dark magic people. What does that sound like, right? And I rolled my eyes and kind of like, okay, this is a Harry Potter ripoff. And I quickly realized a few pages in that was not the case. There was a similarity, obviously, to the Harry Potter world, but it was purposeful, I think, and really effective in ways that Harry Potter was not, in my opinion. And so, as I kind of reflect back on this book, I don't think it was trying to copy, but rather kind of add or adapt or just sort of rethink some of the things in a world like Harry Potter and make it even better. So this book does that. The magic doesn't feel ripped off. It feels like an addition. It tackles social issues in a very clear and important way, and it represents those very real issues that we deal with in our own worlds. And so I guess that's how I would describe this story overall. It is magical, definitely be described as fantasy, but it is exceptionally real somehow too. And since I am fairly obsessed with Harry Potter, the way that I read this, I don't think I could have avoided reading it through that lens to some extent, because I just grew up with it, and it's been a really important text to me, but sometimes a really problematic text, which is why I ended up, I think, loving this even more. The Marvelers have these groups that are kind of similar to what goes on in the Harry Potter universe, whereas Harry Potter has witches and wizards and muggles and Death Eaters and this really obvious kind of old-fashioned fairy tale idea of like dark and light and good and evil. The Marvelers have something sort of similar, but it takes a different approach as well. So you have Marvelers that are dealing in, light and magic in that way. And then you have the conjurers who are dealing in darkness and magic. But these things aren't presented in the same way as they are in something like Harry Potter, where one is clearly good and one is clearly evil. It's not like that. It's just different aspects of life or death that are represented instead. And so I think Clayton does a really good job of making the reader aware that as great as Marvelers are, they're not perfect. They are flawed at times in thinking that they're the best group. They even have these floating cities because they want to be close to the stars, which is beautiful, but a thought that is challenged in Clayton's book too, that they're not above everybody. They're not perfect. They're not the only way of being. And the conjurers, where Ella is from, they may guard the underworld and help with the dead and things like that, but it's not regarded as evil in the way that it might be in, Harry Potter. It's just another aspect of life and an important type of magic as well. So I think that that, along with the idea of these fuels, kind of like muggles, really like rounds out the world and creates its own world, but also ties it to the world that we live in reality. Again, this feels very, very real because there are characters from New York City and there are characters from New Orleans, and not just for like half a second, but these things are really discussed as part of who they are throughout this book. And I love that Clayton shows the readers that there's beauty to be celebrated in all groups, and it doesn't have to be old-fashioned or pitting this light and dark and good and evil thing. Because evil in this book comes from societal bias and personal choice, and you can find it in any of the groups, not just in, the dark group or whatever, like you do in a lot of fairy tales. So a little bit about the talents. At Arcanum Training Institute, the young Marvels go, and they find sort of their talent or their Marvel, and there are 5 of them. And I love that they're divided into these different senses, and that they're so clear and obvious. So you don't feel like you have to go through and like relearn everything and memorize different groups. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty real. Like some people maybe align more with touch or taste or vision or the various things, and that does feel really real, as it ties to our world as well. And then their world has things that also sound familiar to the stuff we love about fantasy or the Harry Potter world. I mean, things like classes where you learn the history of spells and incants and moving buildings and rooms and floating books and expensive feasts and these, creatures that are companions. Showers of stardust from the ceiling are all really beautiful elements, and they do feel familiar to, but it is still particularly different in the way that it's expressed. So, for example, the floating books might be in a restricted area or might be restricted themselves, but there's a discussion about why these restricted words keep rearranging themselves or being redacted and disappearing while Ella's trying to educate herself in the darker histories of the Marvel world. It isn't enough to just say, it's the restricted section. There's a whole discussion around, like, why are we trying to cover this up? Why are we trying to pretend that there's no dark history in whatever group it is? There's always a dark history, and we need to learn about it, and we need to address it, and we need to educate ourselves. And that's true in our world, and that's why we're talking about banning books and how terrible that is, from the perspective of librarians and teachers and various things in our own real worlds. And the same with like the feasts, and a lot of books like this, we see these big, glorious, gluttonous feasts, and that's all it is. It's just like, oh, I wish I could eat cupcakes all day. But in this context, the school is diverse racially. People come from all over the world, and they talk a lot about the food and experiences that they have, and food is a big part of that. So we see a lot of different kinds of cuisine, but we also hear a lot of people expressing that they miss their home country or their home food. Even Ella's roommate and friend, Bridget, who says she just really wants a New York hot dog. It's more than just a cavernous magical feast. It's a piece of culture and identity, and I like that aspect of this. There's some really fun items in this world as well. I love the crystals that they wear to aid in translation so that everybody can understand everybody no matter what language they're speaking. I love the bottle tree and conjuring that and how it's described as, a lot of cultures have something like this. It's similar, like we all can understand each other in that way because we do want to like trap evil and protect ourselves. And then what I love most about this world is that it's so clear about the social justice issues that we struggle with, without really labeling things as like good or bad necessarily, but having really full conversations, not just like quotable moments about what it means to be light or dark or good or evil. It's not simplistic in that way. It really showcases microaggressions and biases and even people that are trying or messing up, or, when they move Ella's room assignment because her roommates just don't want to be around the new weird girl who's not from where they're from. And we see people making mistakes. Even people and teachers in the school that we admire don't get it and have to learn too. And I think that's cool because it gives children in the real world a roadmap for how to tackle like tough conversations when we see moments where Ella says, actually, no, that's not okay. And maybe you shouldn't say that. It might be magical, but the issues are real too. And finally, like speaking of real, I got curious and I did a little research about the author, and I found so much interesting stuff because apparently this was based on, the real world, and where she worked in New York City as a librarian and wanted to create literature that her students could see themselves in, which is awesome. So she's also the COO of an organization called We Need Diverse Books, and she just supports writers and people that want to tell stories like this that students can really identify with. And so the final thing I love about this book, again, in comparison, I love that we get the perspective. As a younger person, I felt like I just wanted Hermione's story. I wanted to see more of that. I wanted this girl, who loved to read and felt like me. And so, again, representation. And I felt like Clayton did that for a lot of different groups, including like me as like a female wanting to see that story like played out. I felt like I got my Hermione like fantasy. Like my little sister used to write fan fiction where she would, play out the same stories that were happening, but from Hermione's perspective. And now we don't have to, because we have this version of things. And I just love how she's stubborn and when she's pushed, she'll speak clearly and fairly about things. And I love that she wants to be in the library and she wants to like raise her hand and answer questions, and it's just great. So the more that I read about this world, the more that I started to let those direct comparisons to other universes fade. I don't think I got to the end of this book and felt like I wanted to talk about, other people's books or series nearly as much. I was telling everybody about this one. And I think that's remarkable, especially for something that's shaped some of us for so long and we feel disappointed with in a lot of ways, to be able to say, this is better, this is good, this is a way that I can love something, and then I can critically look at it, and then this person did it in a different way that even speaks more deeply to the same issues and more. I definitely recommend. Definitely recommend this one. There's a second one apparently, and I kind of just wish there were 7 of them instead, so that I could keep reading. Thank you for your time.